Hey guys, Solus here, and today I'm going to be talking about my WvW Necro build. First of all, I want to say this build I've been running since the Death Perception trait came out. I think I made this build the very day that trait came out. It's a full Zerk gear, full Zerk build with Strength runes, the 62006. I'll explain all that in a second. But that build's been meta at least in organized WvW groups and like GVGs and stuff like that. But for the casual players, it hasn't really caught on until probably the last like 5 or 6 months because the full Zerk gear scares a lot of people off. And the thing is, now after the stability changes, Necros are in a lot higher demand because they have the hard CCs that can strip those stability stacks. So there's a lot of newer Necros running around running this build or some variation of it. And so I figured I'd go through and explain some of it, why you take certain traits and why you take certain utilities and all that. First thing I want to cover, though, is the Zerk gear, why it's sustainable in WvW, because a lot of people, when I explain this build to them, they're like, hey, Zerk gear strength runes, that sounds like PvE stuff, how can you actually stay alive in WvW? Well, there's a couple of ways. The first way is just Necros have high base sustainability because they share the same health pool as warriors, which is the highest in the game. And then also they have their life force, which is... once this is filled up in a full Zerk build, you're going to have around 15 to 16,000 life force, something like that, and you can use that to mitigate a lot of damage. So that alone can keep you alive. And the second is your positioning. If you get your positioning down, you will take very little damage. It's most of the time a Necro will go down if they get caught out of position, or something like that. The positioning for Necro is a little bit tricky. I'm going to explain the absolute basics. I could go on all day. There's tons of videos out there on positioning that are, like an hour long and all that. But the basic idea for a Necro is, even though they're quote unquote a backline class and their staff is 1200 range, they technically are a medium range class. And the reason for that is because your wells only have a 900 range, and that's where most of your DPS comes from. And with your Death Shroud AoE abilities only have a 600 range. So if you're back, 1,200 units or further away, you're going to have a hard time getting your wells down using your Death Shroud effectively, which basically is killing all your DPS. Now, for the actual positioning, what I say is with a commander, you have your melee train on your commander. You want to be about 600 units behind your commander, or 10 steps back, however it is. Just create a little buffer between you and that melee train. And the idea is you want to keep your commander and your melee train in between you and the enemy at all times. I know that's easier said than done, but that's ideally what you want to be, because if you get caught out in the open and get static or something like that, you're going to go down. There's nothing you can really do about it. I don't care if, full tank and all that, you're just going to go down. There's another thing with this is the reason you don't want to be too far back is because ideally Necros are going to be running in frontline parties. That might change a little bit, but either way, your parties are going to be giving you buffs, and mainly you're going to be running with a couple of Guardians, a Warrior, and maybe a couple, and like 2 Necros in your party, or like a Necro and LA, something like that. And if you're too far away from those Guardians and Warriors, you're not going to get your stability, you're not going to get your Condi Clears from the Warrior, you're not going to be getting your Fury from the Warrior, etc. So you definitely don't want to be off in the 1500 range where all the Rangers and all that camp. So definitely keep that in mind. So those two things combined really make it so the Zerk gear is viable. Now that I've explained that a little bit, I'll go ahead and get into the gear itself. Obviously, you want to run full Zerk, or as much Zerk as you can. At a bare minimum, you want all your armor Zerk. I'll explain the runes in a second. But for newer Necros or people that are maybe newer to WvW, you are probably going to want to swap in some like Valkyrie or Knights gear or something like that. Valkyrie, Knights, and Cavalier are probably your 3 best options. The only thing to note is if you start swapping out, like if you swap in some of these like Cavaliers, trinkets, and all that, you're going to take a hit on your precision. So you definitely need to swap in, balance that out. I usually balance it out with Knight stuff that has... or Knights or Assassins gear to make sure that that precision stays as close to 50% as possible. And the reason that you want it as close to 50% as possible is because of the Death Perception trait that gives you a bonus 50% crit chance when you're in Death Shroud. So if you have this at around 50%, when you're in Death Shroud, you're going to have 100% crit chance, and that's where the meat of this build and the meat of your DPS is. So for the actual runes, You're going to want to be running Runes of Strength. A couple of Necros, actually, I think it's even on the meta battle, have started running Runes of the Pack, so you get that extra precision. That's definitely an option. Like I said, if you're running a little bit tankier gear on your trinkets and stuff like that, then it's worth noting. But ideally, you want to be running the Strength runes because the Might duration is really nice, and the 5% damage while under the effects of Might, which with this build you're always going to have a ton of Might, is really nice, whereas you lose that on the Runes of the Pack. So I still strongly suggest the Runes of Strength. Also, the Runes of Strength are kind of pricey, but they're definitely worth it. With this build, you can actually take this and do well enough as a Necro can in PvE and dungeons and stuff like that. So for the weapons, you're going to be running Staff, obviously, and an Axe, and then you want an Offhand. The 3 Offhand weapons are all viable. You have your Dagger, Warhorn, and Focus. I prefer in Zerg type situations the Dagger for a couple of reasons. One is the Condi clear on Dagger 4. It's great for clearing in a MOAB or something similar, just because you don't, like, if you have full health and you're chilled or crippled, and you want to clear the condition, you don't want to waste your heal just for that, so you can use your the Dagger 4 for that. And then also the 900 range AoE. A lot of people underestimate the weakness condition. I think it was Nox that actually mentioned it not too long ago in one of his videos, that weakness is like it's like an offensive version of protection. So this is really good to put some range pressure on the enemy melee train, or whoever, just, give yourself a little bit of extra protection. It's also nice to put for range pressure on downed enemy players, because it is a little bit slower cast time, so it works really nice for that. Then you have your Focus. Focus I tend to use. It's a little bit more single target focus. Well, obviously single target focus or oriented. It's better for GVGs and stuff like that because of this skill's Final Shivers. It's great for taking out enemy LEs and Guardians, etc. And then you can, I don't even have a Warhorn on me, but Warhorn, a lot of Necros take for the extra swiftness. The AoE cripple that Warhorn 5 has, an interrupt on Warhorn 4 is pretty nice as well. Also another thing is that if you're in smaller scale stuff like GVGs or even like PvP, the Warhorn 5 gains Life Force really quick. So if you're having a hard time getting Life Force for whatever reason, Warhorn is definitely nice for that. I covered the offhands. Just a couple of notes. I'm not going to go through all the other skills on your Axe and Staff, but just 2 skills to note. A lot of newer Necros, they see the Staff 4, and it does a lot of DPS, but it's also a Condi transfer. And I usually save this and only use this when I know I'm safe, because it's another option, like if you do get weakness on you, or if you do get chilled or crippled, and you don't want to waste your heal for it, you can use your Staff 4 to clear that condition real quick. It's definitely nice for that. So just be a little bit hesitant. Don't just spam your Staff 4. It's a very, very valuable skill. Either use it to clear those Condis or use it when you're absolutely safe. Now the next skill that I'm going to point out is your Axe 3. This is a really, really powerful skill. I think it's underestimated a little bit. It's on a really short cooldown, and it gives you retaliation, does an AoE cripple, and removes a boon. It's great for removing swiftness or stability from an enemy trying to run away. It's great for putting pressure on enemy downs. It does, some decent DPS. So you'll see me using this skill quite a lot. Now I'll go ahead and talk about the sigils for the weapons. For my main Zerg build, I use sigils of strength on both my weapons. Reason for that is, one, they proc in Death Shroud. You get some really nice might stacks from it, and that makes sure that your strength, that 6 trait on the rune, is always proc, so at least you always have a couple of stacks of might on you to get that extra 5% damage. And then on my offhand, I either use the Superior Sigil of Bloodlust for Zerg type situations. If you're doing like GVGs or roaming, usually you're going to want to swap this out for either a Sigil of Energy or possibly like a Sigil of Fire. That differs a little bit from the meta build. They actually use Sigils of Fire over the Sigils of Strength, but I already said the reason the Sigils of Strength is because, well, in some of those longer fights, you might not always be getting or be close enough to your Guardians to be getting might. So it definitely makes sure that that's procced. And then on my staff, I run, once again, that Sigil of Strength, and then a Sigil of Energy. The reason I run at least one Sigil of Energy is because I don't run a Stunbreaker for utility anymore. But if you're feeling ballsy or you're running a Stunbreaker down here, once again, you can run that Sigil of Fire, Sigil of Air, just to be a little bit more bursty. That's pretty much it for the gear itself. Now, since I was talking about the utilities, I'll go ahead and go into that. I've already mentioned this heal a little bit. This is one of the best heals in the game. This also adds to your sustainability, because you can go from 20% health with all the conditions on, you pop this, and all of a sudden, hey, you're back in the fight, because you gain 90% of your health back. The only thing to note is it does have a little bit longer cast time, so it gets interrupted a lot. I have actually noticed it's easier to, if you do get out of position, you're taking a lot of focus fire, getting a lot of damage on you. It's easier to go just directly into Death Shroud, because you don't have to worry about the cast time. Get yourself into a decent position and then come out and spam your heal, so you don't make sure it's not interrupted. For your other utilities, obviously you want your Well of Corruption, Well of Suffering. This is pretty much what the build's all about. This is where your DPS come from. Now, the thing is that you need to make sure, because sometimes you can't always get both wells off, you need to make sure Well of Corruption goes down first. A lot of Necros will make the assumption that you want your DPS first. No, you want to strip the boons off of the enemy melee train as quick as possible. The only time I ever swap out these wells is if I'm in the, I need to run back, and I'll swap in Signet of the Locust. But one note on that is I will even keep this utility panel open as I'm running, so then that way, if I see an enemy or something like that, I can swap back into my wells, so I don't get caught in combat without one of my wells. This third utility slot, there's a lot of options here. As of right now, I'm running Spectral Wall. This is really great for stripping those stab stacks. And since stability is actually getting stripped now, these spheres are getting through. Before, you'd put this down on an enemy Zerg and they just laugh at you because they all have 45 freaking minutes of stability or whatever, and they just run through. But now it's definitely worth it, because, like I said, those spheres are getting through. It's really great for putting in the middle of Zerg and splitting them in half. The only disadvantage of this is for newer Necros, especially newer people to WvW World. You don't have a stun breaker. So usually I tell people to start off running spectral armor. Gives you some protection, and it's a nice stun breaker. Another option that I actually use still quite a bit is Spectral Walk. It's also a stun breaker. It gives you some mobility, but it gives you mobility in a couple of different ways. Obviously, one is the swiftness, and the second is, especially on the Borderlands map, let's say you're in a Gary fight and you die and you need to run back. Those cliffs that everybody has to jump down, and normally what you do is you jump down to a ledge and then you wait for your health to go back up and then you jump down. That takes forever. If you switch to Spectral Walk, there's that trick where if you double tap the button right before you hit the ground, you only take the fall damage from where you first hit that button. So you only take fall damage for like 10 feet. So it's definitely nice. It can increase your mobility a bit, so you don't have to keep jumping down those ledges. Another thing that you can use it for, I've suggested to newer Necros, is a lot of Necros have an issue. They can get their wells down, but then to get away from the enemy Zerg is sometimes tricky, because a lot of times there'll be statics and all that. One thing you can do is pop your Spectral Walk, run in, dump your wells, and then hit the Spectral Recall, and that'll put you back where, obviously where you originally started, further away from the enemy melee train and all that. So that's something you can do until you get a little bit better with your positioning and all that. Another thing to note, a lot of Necros do run this Well of Darkness. I'm not a fan of it. It's hard enough to get 2 wells down, let alone 3. And also, one thing to note is your wells are already a dark field, so if people are blasting that, they're already doing AoE blindness anyway. I guess that's more specific. And then the last skill that you'll ever use on a Zerk Necro is Corrupt Boon. This is more for GVGs and smaller roaming groups and all that. One thing to note, it is kind of funny in large-scale fights. You can commander snipe with it. Really pisses off enemy commanders, but you didn't hear that from me, and I never suggested you ever commander snipe, but it is there. The reason it's so powerful, especially against Guardians and Ellies, is because if you hit somebody that has a bunch of boons on them with this, they basically have 2 options. One is to completely disengage and blow a bunch of cooldowns, or they're in larger scale fights, they're pretty much dead if they don't do anything about it. So that's why this skill is so powerful. But as of right now, with all those, do your best to run the Spectral Wall once you get used to not running a Stunbreaker. Now we'll talk about the Elite. It's the age-old question between Plague Form and Lich Form. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. For newer Necros, obviously you're going to want to run Plague Form. It's nice as an escape, great for getting into towers and keeps and all that where there's a bunch of people. And the stability is actually nice because it pulses 3 stacks of stability every 3 seconds. So even if they're spamming hard CCs on you, you're still going to be getting tons of stabs from that. It's also really nice because it does have the poison field. You can, if you have a bunch of enemy down players, you just sit on top of them with that poison field to make it harder for them to get bannered. And it also helps you get tags. There's a lot of times I'll just pop Plague Form to make sure I get my tags on everything. Now, the thing is, that's a little bit more about sustainability and obviously, the blinds and all that. But then you can also switch to Lich. Yes, Lich has insane DPS. It has a great boon strip on Lich 5. It'll strip all boons and cure all conditions on 5 targets, depending on if you cast it on enemies or allies, obviously. But the only problem is that it literally makes you the largest target on the field. I don't care if you're roaming in a Zerk or in PvP. As soon as you go Lich Form, every enemy player is looking at you and is going to focus you. So if you're not ready to deal with that kind of focus, a lot of times you'll just go into Lich and then you're just going to get locked down, take so much damage you can hardly do any DPS, and you basically wasted an Elite. One thing to note with actually both Lich and Plague Form, it's mainly with Lich, is that you are going to get focused, and once you get down to about 50% health or just under it, that's when a lot of traits start proccing, and a lot of people do more damage to players below 50% health. So then you start taking damage really quickly. And I've seen way too many people just sit in Lich Form and actually die. Ideally, what you want to do, I don't care if you just popped it and you're taking a bunch of damage, get out of Lich Form and instantly go into Death Shroud, because you are going to be taking a lot of that fire. If you come out of Lich Form and try to heal right away, your heal 9 times out of 10 is going to get interrupted. Same thing I kind of said before, get into Death Shroud, get into decent position, and then pop your heal. That's pretty much covers it for the utilities. Now I'll get into the traits. The traits are pretty standard here. It's the 62006 build. Obviously, you're going to be wanting to run the Reaper's Might. This works really great with the Strength Runes and the Strength Sigils, since you're going to have pretty close to 100% crit chance with this build. With those Sigils of Strength, you're going to have 60% chance to actually gain 2 stacks of Might per Life Blast, which is really nice. And then you come over here to Axe Training. I prefer to use Axe Training for a couple of reasons. One, I really like, like I said before, that Axe 3 keeps on lower cooldown, makes it do some more DPS, and Axe 2 is a great focus skill. But also, the 10% damage increase also applies to Death Shroud. So the thing is that if you are going to Death Shroud and you want a little bit more burst, you want it. I know sometimes it's a lot to think about, but try to have your Axe equipped and then go into Death Shroud. That definitely helps out your burst DPS a little bit. And then you come over here to Close to Death, obviously, kind of like what I was talking about before. Once you get below 50% health, or once the enemy gets below 50% health, you do 20% more damage. This is great. Necros are really good at finishing fights, and it's because of this trait. You come down here to Focus Rituals, pretty obvious there since this is Wells build. You want to be able to put those down at range. The only thing to note is that, like I said, this build can be used for dungeons. If you're going to run this in a dungeon, switch this out for Reaper's Precision, because you're going to be stacking on bosses and all that. Oh, one thing to note, I forgot to mention, with Axe Training, if you don't want to run Axe Training, or if you're doing like PvP or a GvG style where you need more single target focus, swap it out for Chill of Death, because it'll cast Spinal Shivers on a foe once they hit 50% health. If you are focusing somebody down with your Life Blast, this works really, really good against LEs and all that. The reason I don't use it in Zerg fights is because it is only one target, and there's no guarantee, since you're doing so many AoEs, that it's actually going to proc on somebody that has any boons anyway. So there's that. And then you come down here to the Soul Reaping line. This is actually where Necros get a lot of their sustainability from. Right here, you're going to be using Unyielding Blast. Now, the thing is that once you have all your AoEs on cooldown or whatever, Necros, a lot of the time they start single targeting like Ellies or something like that, or other Necros with their Life Blast. And the problem with Life Blast, with everything that's going on, let's say, you know, you're targeting this Ellie's at 50% health, you only need to hit him like 2 more times to take him out. And all of a sudden, there's a freaking Ranger that comes in with a bear tagging along behind him. The Ranger goes off God knows where, and then you have this stupid derpy bear sitting in between you and this Ellie that you're about to kill. And that bear is going to take that Life Blast hit if you don't have this trait. If you do have this trait, it pierces through him, you don't have to worry about it. This is also great for chokes when a bunch of people are lined up and all that stuff. And then this minor trait here is worth mentioning. Your last gasp, it's a free stun breaker when you hit 50% health, which is always nice, and free of protection. And then we come over here. I prefer to use near to death because, like I said, a lot of times I go into Death Shroud just real quick to get into a better position so I can use my heal or use a Con Declare or something like that. So that's why I like getting into Death Shroud more often, and I do use my Death Shroud auto attack quite a bit. If you don't want to use this, or if you're doing in smaller scenarios where you're not going to gain as much life force from everything going on around you, you're going to want to run Vital Persistence, so your life force drains slower in Death Shroud. This is definitely better for like PvP and GVGs and stuff like that. If you aren't going to use your Life Blast all that much, then you can actually run both of those for even more sustainability. And then another minor trait worth mentioning here is if your life force is above 50% health, you do 5% extra damage, which is always nice. In larger fights, this is really hard to maintain. You're better off just staying alive. Like if you need to use a bunch of your life force to stay alive, you're better off doing that. But it's something worth noting that if you're completely fine, make sure to bail out of don't just camp Death Shroud and get below that 50% threshold unless you absolutely have to. And then we come to the trait that this entire build is about, Death Perception. Increase your critical hit chance while in Death Shroud by 50%. If you run full Zerk gear, and then I'll talk about it in a second, the precision oils, the maintenance oils, you're going to have basically 99% crit chance in Death Shroud. And that's where all of your DPS comes from. Now, it's not only on the Death Shroud skills, it's also on your wells. So if you cast your wells and just go into Death Shroud, not even do anything, your wells are going to be critting 100% of the time or close to it. So that's one thing to note. So sometimes it's worth it. You'll throw your wells down and you need to retreat. Just go into Death Shroud just so your wells make sure are doing as much DPS as possible. Now, in a recent patch, they made it so Foot in the Grave is a stun breaker. Yes, it gives you one, pathetic stack of stability, which is going to get stripped right away, so it's hardly worth it for that. I am traded to get into Death Shroud quicker, so I could have a stun breaker every 6 seconds. But the thing is, you take such a huge DPS hit, it's rarely worth it. I don't think I've ever run this, even if I'm running in a party by myself and have no stability, I'm getting knocked around all over the place, you are still going to help your party or your Zerg out more by doing more DPS. So this Death Perception is just too nice to get rid of. The only time I could ever see somebody using this is maybe in some weird PvP build or something like that. But yeah, definitely just get used to your positioning. If you really want a stun breaker, use one somewhere else because this trait's just too nice to not have. On the note of food, you're going to be wanting the Master Maintenance Oils to give you that extra boost in precision to get you up to that 100% crit chance in Death Shroud. I did some math on if it's worth running, like mixing in some Assassin's gear and then running the powerful Sharpening Stones instead. You're better off just running full Zerk gear and this because the power difference is pretty much a wash. The thing is that the reason I like having it almost exactly at 100% is because when you are using your Life Blast and bursting somebody down, and that one time, like it happens all the time in PvP when you only have like 80% crit chance, that one time it doesn't crit, that means that player gets away. So that's why it's so important to do whatever you can to get that precision as high as possible. For the food, I run the Seaweed Salad. I know it's extremely expensive, but 10% extra damage while moving is really nice. So definitely keep in mind that if you are attacking, you should be moving all the time, but sometimes, like if you're attacking the Lord or something like that, just make sure you're strafing back and forth to proc this food. If you want to run something that's a little bit cheaper, I've actually been running these fried golden dumplings. 20% boon duration is nice for, swiftness and all that. The main thing is it's 33% chance for might on crit, and it has no internal cooldown. So once again, you go into Death Shroud, 100% crit chance. You got Death Shroud 4, in the middle of a Zerg, it's pretty much instant 25 stacks of might. This is actually really nice if you're running, excuse me again, if you're running in a smaller group that doesn't stack might as well, or you can't, you don't have a lot of guardians for whatever reason. This food actually is really nice, and it's a ton cheaper than the seaweed salad. So that's pretty much it that I run for food. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers. I know this is a little bit lengthy, but there's lots to talk about with this, I guess. It pretty much covers the basics of the build and all that, the things that I swap out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This build is incredibly satisfying. It might be frustrating at first just because you are going to get knocked around a little bit. It's a high risk, high reward. It's definitely worth it. That first time you get that perfect well bomb off, and then you go into Death Shroud and everything just dies. It'll be worth it. And then you just look over to the right, and all you see are bags, bags, bags. Definitely worth it for that. So hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys get tons of bags with this build.